The day I received Michael's text, I couldn't have known how it would haunt me for days. The words seemed so simple, yet they carried a weight that crushed the air out of my lungs. Sorry, but my wife prefers to have just her family at dinner tonight. Hope you understand. Hope I understand? I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I sat there staring at my phone screen, trying to process what felt like a knife twisting in my heart. I thought back to all the years I had poured into raising Michael, to all the sacrifices I had made, sleepless nights, missed holidays, all the times I put my career on hold just to make sure he had everything he needed. And now this, a text message that essentially told me I wasn't important enough to share a meal with. The ache in my chest grew stronger with every passing minute. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. Not in front of him. Not in front of anyone. So I sat there in silence, alone in my thoughts, trying to make sense of everything. Why was it so hard for him to make time for me? Why had it become easier for him to spend time with Laura's family than with his own mother? The more I thought about it, the more questions piled up. But no answers came. As I sat there, staring blankly at the empty room, I realized that this wasn't just about one dinner. It wasn't just about one missed opportunity to bond with my son. It was a symptom of a much larger problem. A problem that had been growing slowly over the years. The distance between us. The space that had widened ever since Lara entered the picture. At first, it had been small things, his phone calls growing shorter, his visits becoming less frequent. But I told myself it was just a phase. After all, he was busy with school, with work, with building his life. I understood that. I had been through it myself and I was his age. But over time, those excuses began to feel like empty words. The truth was, it wasn't just about his busyness. It was about something deeper. I thought about how Michael used to be. I remembered the days when he would run to me after school, excited to tell me about his day, about the things that mattered to him. I remembered the nights when he would ask for help with his homework, when we would sit together at the kitchen table, laughing about silly things, sharing our thoughts. We had a connection back then, a bond that I thought was unbreakable. But somewhere along the way, I lost him. Or maybe I didn't lose him. Maybe I just stopped seeing the changes, stopped noticing that my role in his life was being replaced by something else. Someone else. Lara. When he first started dating Lara, I was cautiously optimistic. She seemed sweet, charming, everything a mother could want for her son. But something about her always felt a little off to me. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but there was a coldness in her eyes, a sharpness in her tone whenever she spoke about things that mattered to me. I ignored it at first, thinking it was just my protective instincts kicking in. But the longer they were together, the more I realized that she was starting to take my place. It wasn't an overt thing. She wasn't rude or dismissive, not at first. But there was a certain way she would look at Michael, a way that told me she was trying to mold him into something else, something more suited to her life. And he let her pull him away, bit by bit, until I was left standing on the sidelines, watching them build a life without me in it. The first real sign came after they got engaged. I had been so excited, so eager to help plan their wedding, to show her that I was ready to welcome her into the family. But when I offered my help, she politely declined, telling me that she and Michael had everything under control. I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe she just wanted to do things her way. But looking back, I realized now that was the beginning of the end. That was when I first felt the walls going up between us. After the wedding, things didn't improve. In fact, they got worse. The visits became fewer, the calls shorter, and I began to feel like I was an inconvenience. At family gatherings, I was often the last to be included, the first to be dismissed. And every time I tried to reach out to make an effort, it felt like I was pushing against an invisible barrier. Laura was always there, always in the background, pulling the strings. And Michael, my son, the boy I had raised with so much love and care, was becoming someone else. Someone who didn't need me anymore. Someone who didn't even seem to want me around. The pain of it was almost unbearable. I would sit at home, in the quiet of my living room, and think about the things I had given up to raise him. The career opportunities I had missed, the social events I had skipped, all because I wanted to be there for him. And now, it seemed like all of that was for nothing. And then came the text. The final confirmation that I was no longer a priority in his life. That I was just another person in the background, waiting for scraps of his time and attention. I didn't know how to feel. Hurt? Betrayed? Angry? All of those emotions swirled inside of me, but none of them seemed to make sense. I didn't know how to fix this, how to get back to the place where Michael and I were close, where we could share our lives with each other without this distance. I spent that night alone, staring at the empty chair across from me, imagining what it would have been like if he had been there, if we had shared a meal, talked about our lives. But instead, I was alone in the silence, and the only thing that filled the space between us was the growing realization that something had been lost. Something important. Something that might never come back. The next morning, I woke up and stared at my phone, hoping for a message from Michael, an explanation, an apology. But none came. The text hung in the air like a heavy fog, and I couldn't escape it. It was as though I was invisible to him now, as though I no longer mattered. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him everything I had been feeling, the hurt, the confusion, the loneliness, but I didn't. I couldn't. Because I knew that no matter what I said, it wouldn't change anything. Not now. Instead, I let the silence consume me, hoping that somehow, one day, he would remember what it was like before all of this. Before Lavra, before the distance, before the hurt. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't just losing him. I was losing myself, and I didn't know how to find my way back. I remember the day Michael turned 16 like it was yesterday. The weather was perfect. A crisp autumn day with the kind of golden light that made everything seem warmer than it was. We went out to his favorite diner, just the two of us. I had planned it that way, a special lunch to mark the milestone of his growing up, to remind him that he was still my little boy. Even as he stood on the edge of adulthood. We sat in a corner booth, the smell of grilled cheese and French fries filling the air as we talked about his future. He was a little quieter than usual that day, but I didn't mind. I knew he had a lot on his mind: college applications, his friendships, his dreams. I let him speak when he was ready, and I listened. "I think I want to be a writer," he said, suddenly looking up from his menu with a thoughtful expression. "Maybe publishing or something like that. I think I could do it." I smiled at him, proud of the conviction in his voice. The whole world was ahead of him, and he had so many possibilities. "That's great, Michael. Whatever you decide to do, I'll always support you. I just want you to be happy." He nodded, but there was a seriousness in his gaze that caught me off guard. "You've always supported me, Mom. I want you to know I'll always be there for you, no matter what happens. I'll never forget what you did for me. I'll never leave you." His words filled me with warmth, and I held onto them like a lifeline. The bond we had, the promises we made, felt so solid, so unbreakable. I didn't know it at the time, but that moment would be the last time I would hear him say something like that. In the years that followed, life became more complicated. Michael went off to college and I could see him changing before my eyes. There were new friends, new experiences, new challenges. And through it all, I kept in touch, offering guidance when I could, letting him know I was just a phone call away if he needed me. At first, he did call often, mostly to ask for money, to share a new excitement or frustration, or just to talk. And I was always there for him. No matter how busy I was, no matter what was going on in my life, I made sure to be there when he needed me. But then came Lavra. When they first started dating, I tried to be cautious. She was lovely, I had to admit. Polite, well-spoken, smart. But there was something about her that made me uneasy. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but she had an edge to her, a certain coldness. When she smiled, I felt like I was seeing the smile of someone who had learned how to mask her true feelings, not the smile of someone who was genuinely happy. Still, I told myself I was overthinking it. Maybe she was just reserved. Maybe she was just a little shy. But as the months passed, something began to shift. I saw how she seemed to take charge of their relationship. How she would make decisions for Michael before even asking for his input. She would talk over him, dismissing his ideas with a sharpness that made my heart clench. And he never spoke. Not once. It was as if he was willing to let her take the lead in everything, including his life. When they announced their engagement, I tried to be supportive. I offered to help with the wedding plans, to do whatever I could. But every time I suggested something, Lavra shot it down. She had everything under control, she said. Michael seemed to agree, backing her up with a quiet nod. It felt like I was being pushed further and further out of the picture. I wasn't needed. They were doing everything on their own, and I let it happen. I convinced myself that I needed to respect their space, that this was a new chapter for Michael, and he had to find his own way. But as I stepped back, I realized that in doing so, I had let myself fade into the background. The phone calls became less frequent. The visits stopped altogether. There was always an excuse: work, errands, plans with friends. And when I did manage to get a visit, Lavra was always there, hovering, making sure that I didn't get too close. The first time I truly felt the sting of my fading role came on Christmas. Michael and Lavra had been married for just over a year, and I had hoped that this holiday would be different. I hadn't seen them much, and I was craving the warmth of a family gathering, the familiar rhythm of laughter, of stories shared over a holiday meal. But when I called to invite them over, the response I got was not what I expected. "We're going to Laura's parents' house this year," Michael had said, his voice tinged with the awkwardness of someone who was avoiding a confrontation. "Maybe next year we can do something at your place, next year." The words stung. It wasn't just about the holiday. It was about the distance that had grown between us. About the way Michael had so easily slipped into his new life with Lavra, leaving behind the family he had once been so close to. And that was when I started to question everything. Had I done something wrong? Had I made some mistake in raising him? Or had he simply grown up and outgrown me? The more I thought about it, the more it seemed like I was the one who had been left behind, the one who wasn't part of his life anymore. And the hardest part was that I didn't know how to fix it. I tried to push those thoughts aside, but they kept creeping back, like a dark cloud that wouldn't go away. The pain of seeing him choose her family over mine. The pain of realizing that I was no longer the person he turned to when he needed advice or comfort was overwhelming. I wanted to reach out to pull him back, but I didn't know how. Every time I tried, I was met with polite distance, with the subtle yet firm barrier that Lavra had built between us. But then came the wedding. They had a beautiful ceremony, the kind that leaves you breathless, the kind that makes you believe in love. Michael looked so happy, But as I watched him say his vows to Lavra, I couldn't help but feel a sense of loss, a sense that my role in his life was coming to an end. I wasn't just losing my son. I was losing the boy I had raised, the boy who had promised to always be there for me. I threw myself into my work after that, distracting myself with endless tasks, trying to avoid the truth. But the truth kept coming back to me, again and again. Michael was no longer the son who needed me. He was the man who had his own life, his own family, and I was no longer a part of it. It was hard to accept, harder than anything I had ever faced. And the hardest part was knowing that no matter how much I tried, no matter how much I wished things were different, I couldn't change what had already happened. I couldn't turn back time and undo the choices that had been made. The hardest truth of all was that Michael had moved on, and I was left to try to piece together a life for myself, a life that didn't revolve around him anymore. But every time I saw him with Lavra, every time I received a message like the one I got that day, the pain came rushing back. The broken promise, the gap between us, the feeling that, no matter how much I loved him, I was no longer needed. And I didn't know how to make peace with that. As the weeks passed after Michael's text, the silence between us grew louder, more oppressive. The kind of silence that fills a room so completely that it feels like it's pressing in on you from all sides. I spent countless nights staring at my phone, waiting for a message, an apology, any sign that Michael still cared. But nothing came. Each time I reached out, the response was always the same, a short, polite reply, or worse, nothing at all. It was a strange kind of agony, the knowing that he was out there, living his life, and yet I couldn't find a place in it anymore. He was out there with Lavra and her family, enjoying dinners, vacations, and holidays, while I sat alone in my home, haunted by memories of a time when he and I shared everything. I had never imagined that the relationship between a mother and her son could become so distant, so broken, and I couldn't understand why. I tried to focus on other things, to distract myself with work, with hobbies, with anything that might ease the ache in my chest. But nothing worked. I felt like I was constantly running from something, constantly trying to fill a void that nothing seemed to fill. I couldn't escape the truth that hung over me like a shadow. I was no longer a priority in Michael's life. I was no longer the person he turned to when things went wrong, or the person he sought advice from when he needed help. What hurt the most wasn't that he had moved on, but that it had happened so gradually that I didn't even see it coming. One moment, we were close, sharing our lives and our dreams, and the next, I was standing on the outside, watching as he built a new life without me. I thought back to all the moments we had shared over the years, all the little things that had once felt so important, the weekends we spent together, the trips we took as a family, the late-night talks where we would stay up for hours just talking about everything and nothing at all. And I couldn't help but wonder, what happened to all of that? How did we go from being inseparable to being strangers? The truth was, I had never imagined that a relationship so strong could be so easily unraveled. I had spent so many years focused on making sure Michael had everything he needed, material things, guidance, love, that I had neglected to notice the subtle ways in which he was pulling away from me. I had been so focused on giving, on sacrificing myself for him, that I had forgotten to nurture my own life, my own identity. It wasn't just Michael who had changed. I had changed too. Somewhere along the way, I had lost sight of myself, in trying so hard to be the perfect mother I had become someone I didn't recognize. I had become a woman whose entire world revolved around her son, whose worth was tied up in being his mother. And when that bond began to fray, I didn't know who I was anymore. I tried to reach out to him in subtle ways, hoping that something would spark a connection again. I invited them over for dinner, tried to call more often, tried to make small talk when I did see him, but it was as though I was speaking to a stranger. There was a politeness to our conversations, but no warmth, no real connection. And every time I tried to push past that barrier, I was met with resistance, a coldness that only grew with each attempt. I spent countless nights lying awake, wondering what had gone wrong, asking myself the same question over and over. What happened to us? But no matter how many times I asked, no answers came. There was no one moment I could point to, no single conversation or event that had caused this distance between us. It wasn't something that had happened overnight. It had been a slow, gradual process, like the erosion of a cliffside. One small shift at a time until the foundation beneath me was gone. And all the while, I had been holding on, unwilling to let go of something that was slipping away. But how could I let go? How could I accept the reality that Michael no longer needed me the way he once did? How could I accept that I wasn't the most important person in his life anymore? That his wife, whose new family, had taken my place? I hated the feelings of jealousy and hurt that bubbled up inside me, but I couldn't help it. I wanted to be a part of their lives. I wanted to be the one they turned to when things got hard, when they needed help or advice. But instead, I was a stranger, a distant relative, someone who was tolerated but not truly needed. I tried to tell myself that this was just a phase, that things would get better, that Michael would come back to me when he realized how much I had always been there for him. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. This wasn't a phase. This was the reality of a mother losing her place in her child's life. This was the painful transition from being needed to being forgotten. And that hurt more than anything. Wondered if it was too late for us. If the distance between us had become too great to ever bridge again. Could I ever get back to the way things were? Could I ever rebuild the bond we once had? The thought of not being a part of his life anymore was almost too much to bear. It felt like I was losing my son all over again. Only this time, it was permanent. He had a new family now, a new life, and I wasn't a part of it. But as much as it hurt, I knew I had to face the truth. I couldn't keep holding on to something that wasn't there anymore. I couldn't keep waiting for a message that wasn't coming, for an apology that was never going to be offered. And so, I began the painful process of letting go. It wasn't easy. It wasn't something I could do overnight. But I knew it was the only way forward. I had to find a way to live my life without him, to build a future that didn't depend on his approval or his presence. The hardest part was realizing that, in letting go of him, I was also letting go of a part of myself, the part of me that had defined myself as a mother, as Michael's mother. And in doing so, I had to rediscover who I was outside of that role. I had to find new meaning in my life, new purpose, new joy. It was a journey I wasn't ready for, but I had no choice but to take it. But the pain didn't go away. Not right. Away. Every day felt like I was walking through a fog, trying to find my way. And in the quiet moments, when the world seemed to stop moving, I would think about Michael, about the promise he had made me all those years ago. The promise that he would never leave me. And I would wonder, was that promise ever real? Or was it just a dream I had created? A hope that had been slowly dying with every passing year. And then, in the silence, I realized that maybe it didn't matter. Maybe the promise was never about him. Maybe it was about me. About my ability to let go and find my own way again. Maybe, after all this time, it was time to make a new promise. A promise to myself. A promise to live, even if it meant doing so without him.